I'll stop recording. Okay, I think it's working. But
Yeah,
if either one of us doesn't get a recording, we share it with the other. We'll see how it goes. All good.
Absolutely. Okay. So without further ado, I just wanted to give a quick introduction to our members who will be seeing this first and foremost, and of course to the public audience much later. This is Mr. Dan Winter. He is, I mean, I'm almost speechless with respects to his work and his contributions to, physics, to, electrical engineering and all of that. I don't really, to be truthful, folks, I didn't really have much of an introduction for Mr. Winter, simply because his work speaks for itself, really. But without further ado, sir, thank you so very much for coming on, and thank you for being with us here today.
Hello, thank you. Yes, so everyone knows I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, flameandmind.com, therify.net. I'm very happy to be with young Dave here today, with the emphasis being on young, because fire in his eyes, enthusiasm, interest, good questions, keeps us old people less boring. All good, all good. Plus,
Thank you, sir.
The Generation Z represents the hope for the future, and that's a good thing. So
exactly.
Today's lecture, today's conversation, and it's a fairly prepared set here, is entitled "The Deep Science of the Lost Art of Resurrection," the deep science. Subtitle: "The Real Light at the End of a Long Tunnel of a Parasitic ET History." That's the subtitle. So again, deep science of the lost art of resurrection, the light at the end of the tunnel, a long tunnel of ET parasite history. That's the subject we want. And the real focus of this conversation is to understand how it is the growth of your aura as living plasma that is your hope for lucid dreaming, remote viewing, memory through death, immortality, and literally the physics of conscious evolution. So growing your aura as living plasma is what defines success or failure in terms of spiritual growth and consciousness growth. And that's the storal to the Mori. And we want to use the physics of ET history as a way to make that playful and fun, the story of the nine, among other things, as it were. So we're gonna get to the Elena Danaan story of the nine and meetings on Ganymede, and supposedly Atun, even Enki, that lineage returns as the Kadistu, the life designer. The big picture of the current ET history, and we agree with Elena Danaan, Alex Collier, Michael Salla, who are saying that in fact, the Federation, the Galactic Federation, has actually done a lot of work removing some of the parasitic ETs from the solar system, but now we have to do our part. But that is the second part of this lecture. The first part of this lecture is the lost art of resurrection. Now, I have had the pleasure of having some communication with Freddy Silva here. Freddy is a hero. I like Freddy. He's a great guy. He's been making some fabulous films, and he's done great work on the sacred sites. And his latest conclusion, and he has a beautiful film called The Other World, in which he says you access the other world when you go to these sacred sites, and it's kind of a doorway or portal. So the magnetic lines of these sacred sites function as an immortalizing doorway or portal, literally the lost art of resurrection. And, I don't know about you, Dave. I was raised in a very Catholic family. Were you? Or
right? Yes. Yep. Yeah. As was I.
So there I was. I mean, I was the church organist, and and my parents, and these are good, well-intentioned people, and there's some actually excellent science behind the Christianity myth. In fact, Dictionary of Jesus Physics, our article on that, went viral. I mean, we have done a lot of work on this, the physics of Christianity. Basically, the power of grace is the power to attract living charge, and it's useful advice, very useful. But anyway, so the one thing within Christianity, which Freddy Silva does a pretty good job of sort of poking fun at, is he actually finds the chapter in the Essene and quotes from it when Jesus is sort of chuckling afterwards and says, "Those dummies, they thought they crucified me, but actually it was Simon and Sirene, and hello, they didn't even kill me." Oh, so somehow that art of resurrection, as Christianity teaches, has a little bit of a, I won't call it a scam, but it's actually very misleading. And whereas Freddy Silva goes into a great deal of trouble to show how these sacred sites were designed to create the kind of implosive centripetal sacred site plasma field, which enables you to do something, get resurrected. What exactly does that mean if you're an electrical engineer like me with a graduate degree in psychophysiology? What the heck is the art of resurrection in terms of psychophysiology and electrical engineering? That's the title of this talk. That's what this is about. So Freddy is basically saying that the ability to get coherent when you're propagating, today our terms are remote viewing, astral travel, lucid dreaming. And we've come to do a lot of work on the physics of what that means. Basically, we're very proud, as I've said too many times, that our Therify.net is now being used by lucid dreaming schools because it's so good at triggering lucid dreaming. Well, what's the electrical engineering of that? And what does that have to do with resurrection? Well, Therify.net is a plasma generator. It's implosive. It's the same plasma tubes you see depicted in the old Egyptian pictures. And it's phase conjugate, which means it's implosive, very broad spectral centripetal. And the compressional waves, when they come, we say pine cones kissing noses, they create broad spectral, perfect squeezing compression called longitudinal interferometry on the body. Literally restored centripetal forces, literally implosion. And that's called the origin of negentropy, which is the title of my book. So I have a lot to say about that, actually. But the negentropy comes from the fact that that restoration of centripetal force is the origin of negentropy, because that's when your aura becomes self-sorting. And that's when your aura emits something, which is the beginning of the lost art of resurrection, which is the ability to propagate a plasma field which has a longitudinal or compression wave component, sometimes incorrectly called scalar or torsional, which is the physics of what travels between the fractal nodes of the quote unquote sacred sites, the dodecaecosa earth grid, which Freddy is talking about beautifully, beautiful pictures, like when he goes to Malta, the hypogeum, and talks about the 110 to 112 hertz natural key resonant frequency, which is part of a harmonic cascade to induce implosion in the body. And that harmonic series entrains with the brainwave cascade, which then enables the body to become centripetal and therefore create the part of the aura which is longitudinally coherent. As we've said many times, we have too many words for that. The Gurdjieff called it the Kesjan body, and the Tibetans call it the rainbow light body, and the Egyptians called it the Ba from the Ka. But what are the electrical engineers calling it? And that's where I think we need some science here, which is obviously we're saying a longitudinal, entering into an array of compression nodes, which are called sacred sites, and those cross points of perfect compression. At those cross points of the magnetic lines of the earth, dodecaecosa, the sacred sites, as Bruce Cathy showed, there is reduced nuclear critical mass, and we have explained why. At those cross points, you can measure clinically military grade telepathy is possible and not elsewhere, as Cozy proved. So we know a lot about those nodes. They're compression nodes. It's the only place a cathedral, a labyrinth, and a stone circle work really well. And by the way, Therify works a lot better there too, because you get that longitudinal embedding into that array. And inhabiting that array is the beginning of the conversation of what it means to be entering the next dimension. Before I carry on too much, any questions so far? How am I doing?
I mean, fantastic. I'm blown away, truthfully, sir. So this all pertains to the extraterrestrial parasitic incursion, if you will, into the
that's where we want to go. They've been eating our auras for how many years? The ability to prove that stuff, they call it loosh. That's a plasma field, which is food for parasitic ETs. And the issue of getting your aura sealed and coherent so you're not attracting parasites is part of the physics of bliss, because when you're really implosive, when you have your own source of bliss, that plasma fire you create at the center, which is the only end of being a parasite, is when you have your own source of charge, plasma fire, named bliss. So you are by definition electrically a parasite until you have your own source of bliss, because that's the first time you have your own source of charge, literally the introduction of vacuum or 0 point energy. which is the implosion physics. And go ahead. Did you have another?
No, the only thing I wanted to say was thank you. This has been fantastic, and it's only been, I think, 10 minutes.
Well, so the next part of this conversation is about understanding how that plasma domain you call your aura gets powerful, gets fed, and grows. Literally, it's a very simple question. How does plasma get intelligent? Huh? You know, like every single physicist who runs the Plasma Universe website believes in angels. So they must believe that plasma gets intelligent. Well, how does plasma get intelligent? Well, obviously it's spin density, spin symmetry, recursion. And so we're going to talk about some practical stories to make that, to bring that idea home, as it were. And we've talked about this many times, but you know that when we're teaching the kids, and this has become quite famous, our flameinmind.com/outer vision program, many kids around the planet are learning to see without their eyes when they're blindfolded. And they all say the same thing. They go into a relaxed trance-like bliss state. And then they all say the same thing. They see a tornado, a vortex, a wormhole open inside their head, and they look through that tube, that plasma tornado, and that's how they see without their eyes. Every single child tells the same story. So what's the physics? Well, obviously, there's a plasma tornado inside your head, which is a tornado developing an eyeball. And when does that plasma tornado develop an eyeball? Well, that is the physics of consciousness. There is no other physics of consciousness than that plasma tornado. All these people like Gary Schwartz, and they're saying, oh, well, it's the microtubules. Well, the microtubules can contribute to the centripetal force, but that plasma tornado develops an eyeball inside your head, and that fully explains the physics of consciousness, because it explains why focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. And it explains exactly how you take your eyeballs outside your head, because you take that plasma donut with you when you lucid dream, when you die, when you remote view, when you do the art of resurrection.
Wow.
So the ability, and now see, so what we're doing at Flame in Mind, our famous biofeedback brainwave EEGs biofeedback system, iOS, with my partner, Patrick Bauty, who programmed, he's wonderful. And Patrick, when we had a gathering in Amsterdam, we had a bunch of these kids, and we developed technology. Now we know that from the alpha to the gamma, there's a harmonic cascade in the brainwaves, and that geometry of that cascade is a sequence of harmonics in both octave ratio harmonics music and golden ratio cascade of harmonics. And we now know, and that correlates to dramatically the moment at which the kid says, oh, now I can see inside my head, and they can see blindfold, and they're, you know, doing Rubik's Cube, and you know, the kids are doing everything, and they're completely blindfolded. It's obvious they can see. They're doing coloring books accurately within the lines. I mean, obviously they can see without their eyes. Well, how? Well, so what it is that golden ratio and octave cascade function as a pine cone kissing noses, as a harmonic cascade which is squeezing. It's squeezing that vortex tornado and bringing the spin to a point where the pine cones kiss noses. And actually, that point is not subjective, it's very clear. That point is the Planck threshold, 1.61 times 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. And that threshold is the compression point, it's the musical key signature of the universe. And at that threshold, the transverse up and down electromagnetic inertia is translated in vorticity because of the spiral down that pine cone. We have graphics, and most of you have seen those. And at that threshold, the transverse up and down wave, which is not psychoactive, is converted into a compressional wave called longitudinal interferometry, which can go faster than light, can create action at a distance. You know, in physics, where they talk about action at a distance all the time, and they call it entanglement. But you know what entanglement perfected is? Golden ratio phase conjugation. So physics, and they call these Einstein-Rosen bridges. Well, that wormhole, which every physicist knows that wormholes, string theory, is all of physics. All of physics is about wormholes, but they don't know what causes those wormholes to communicate at a distance until they learn what longitudinal compressional interferometry is, because these longitudinal waves go faster than light and they bounce through these still points of leverage at the nodes, the dodecacosa Earth grid. The reason DNA is dodeca, Earth grid is dodeca, and the zodiac is dodeca, and the masses, astrophysics proved the masses, the arrangement of mass in the universe is dodeca. It's compressionally permissive, and therefore longitudinal array, fractal charge distribution efficient. And that distribution in that array is called being in the next dimension and the art of ascension. So if a way to talk about this in terms of New Age woo-woo, saying, well, are you 5-dimensional yet? And what does it going to the next dimension have to do with this anyway? Well, the key experience to know experientially that you're doing just that is the moment when you're in your sacred space, your stone circle, your sacred tree, wherever your favorite sacred space to meditate and have bliss is, wherever that is. And it needs to be somewhere, because if you don't have that, you're in trouble. But anyway, when you're in your sacred space and you're still, and I hear the voices say your ancestors are close, and it's really fun actually. And anyway, when you're in that space and you're very still, and then there's like a little drop of water like half a mile away, and there's a little crackle half a mile away. And in that place of stillness, the first feeling you have is that drop of water or that little crackle half a mile away was in fact inside your body. You have the feeling that that little bit of noise or whatever it was inside, not outside your body, because the crackling of that stillness, that icy stillness that I felt when I was in the Great Pyramid sarcophagus and the lights went out, I felt that. I knew what it meant. When you inhabit that array, which is that longitudinal compressional array, because you got still within the transverse inertia here. So then the compressional inertia became phase coherent, and you could inhabit the array. So that's what the next dimension is. Okay, so, and if you did the power spectra, the frequency signature, your brain was at that point, and we actually now know how to measure that in the microwave emissions of the DNA, that we can take a microwave spectrum analysis of your spinal emissions to measure sacrocranial. This is Bob Dratch's work, so cool. There's actually a microwave emissions 1.91 angstroms based on adenosine diphosphate. So you're radiating a very broad spectral frequency coherence, which is phase conjugate coherent right down to the Planck threshold. And that leverage in that stillness, which is literally how you steer tornadoes for sure, and how you inhabit the array. Well, that's the beginning. And I just mean the beginning of knowing what all these ETs and what the Landon and not everybody say, well, we're 5-dimensional and they're we're more dense over there and they're 6-dimensional. What the heck do they mean by that? What they mean is they have become centripetal in a larger and larger array by increasing the broad spectra of the phase conjugation of the cascade that's producing that distribution enabled. That's what that means, which in short means coherent longitudinal EMF interferometry, which is the name in electrical engineering for the sacred dodecacosa Earth grid, for example. So we're beginning to get an idea then that if we inhabit a larger body of plasma intelligence, then we can graduate from a kindergarten a long way from downtown. I mean, inhabit the stars. I mean, so now we want to go back to our original question, which was how does plasma get intelligent? But first I wanted to mention some of the other partners we've worked with on this. Our flameinmind.com has been presented. We worked with Monroe Institute for many years. In fact, Bob Monroe had Ed Wilson, his research director, come to my farm after I discovered golden ratio in EKG, because he had just discovered that golden ratio in EEG brainwaves was the beginning of when people could shoot themselves out the top of their head. He said it was powerful and dangerous, and he's right, but it is plasma projective. The only definition of Jed, as in Jedi, is that plasma projection. So the point is the Monroe Institute is another example of teaching people plasma projection, which is literally to get up and move outside their body coherently, taking their organs of perception with them. If you ever read Nine Faces of Christ, you know that in the first lucid dream, you might take vision and maybe a little sound. In the next lucid dream, if your aura got more coherent, in that lucid dream, you can also take your sense of smell with you, et cetera, et cetera. So the more organs of perception you can take with you indicates the growth of the phase coherence of that plasma coherent bubble.
Mr. Sorry, sir, Mr. Winter, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt your lecture, sir. I just wanted to ask, when you mentioned smell, I just, for some reason in my head, a childhood memory was brought up to me relative to what you said about being raised Catholic and Christian. A lot of family members, on a more anecdotal, personal sense, speak of, even now, the ones that are still alive, smelling a particular scent of someone who's passed away or something like this. Does that factor into all of that?
Yeah, well, you know, I was in Professor Phil Callahan's lab in Florida making a documentary with him, who was the biophysicist who proved that olfaction is mediated in the infrared based on insect antenna geometry. After we then saw dozens of hummingbirds would smash into the window of a perfectly sealed house when the lady inside was having bliss because the hummingbird could smell it. And it's because the infrared made it through that window, actually. And he actually knew the power spectra, et cetera, et cetera. So the physics of smell, it's not 1 part per billion. That's crap. It's a big part of it is an infrared coherence field. And that is part of ancestor memory. Once you realize how that infrared could be part of the broad spectral phase conjugate of that longitudinal compressional array, that longitudinal field, that fractal field, which is the physics of ancestor memory. Hey, Ave, heaven, presence of charge, taking flight, or plains of Sharon, which is the phase conjugate field of the gold powder, or Champs-Élysées. These are all names for the physics of a fractal field that ancestor memory can inhabit. In fact, in our next recording we're going to do on this channel is with the Aboriginals, teaching about how ancestor memory propagates in that array, why they're called dreaming line song tracks, and why that exactly corresponds with the magnetic line measurements. We actually have color graphics of the magnetic line maps of Australia proving their song lines are magnetic lines. And this was an ancestor memory. And the right song would wake up the right ancestor on that track, just like the right song from the Hopi would cause a certain corn to germinate. And we've measured that and we understand the physics. So, but there's a long history in my family because my mother, who was descended from the Templar, we believe, actually had no sense of smell, which affected her sense of taste, which is then why she became a sugar addict. And yet my partner now, who is French, has an extreme sense of smell, navigates by. And there's a whole physics of that. The best part of that physics is actually when you're teaching the classroom of young kids to visualize a rose with enough accuracy in the Steiner school, the test for success is if the room fills with the smell of roses. And explaining the physics for that is a very useful scientific exercise. Basically, it's the flowering brain. And when the flowering brain gets to the right implosive geometry, there will be an infrared radiance, actually, which is the physics of that smell of roses. And it's, well, I mean, most biodynamic teachers on this planet can say they've done that in many classrooms. And the children lose that inner muscle to make that inner creative visualization inside their head to cause the room to fill with the smell of roses if that child watches too many computer screens when they're too young. They lose the muscle inside their head to enable them to cause light plasma to converge. They lose that muscle, which is the only physics of creation we get. So, you know, get the kids away from the computer monitor for a few hours every day and make sure they're in nature, learning to visualize for themselves. Otherwise, if they're in front of an active source of vision outside their head all the time, they will not make the muscle inside their head to focus light. Therefore, they cannot be creators. That's the physics. And as I say, when the Steiner school teaches the kids how to visualize a rose, first they draw the rose, and then all the kids close their eyes. And when they succeed, the room fills with the smell of roses. And that's the measure that they've succeeded. And the physics is that infrared of the flowering brain, the physics of olfaction, actually. And he proved it with insect antennas and insect navigation. Another example is that same spectral emission that is sometimes in the microwave of the carvings on the pyramid walls being phase coherent in the microwave is why insects navigate by the microwave emissions of the stone carvings on the pyramids. So the best way to study high ceremonial magic from Egypt is to learn microwave antenna design.
Wow.
But the next, not to lose the outline of this lecture, the next point in the outline of this lecture was to just mention briefly, and I have some of his books here, William Buhlman, who has a bunch of books, Adventures in the Afterlife, Adventures Beyond the Body, and Secret of the Soul. Now there's a huge, beautiful literature on how to leave your body. And this is implied in Freddy Silva's Art of Resurrection, in the sense that the moment when your aura gets that critical mass, which is literally critical inertial escape velocity for plasma. So the remote viewers and the out-of-body experiences are talking about precisely what it feels like at the moment when they're about to be able to go out of their body. They talk about a little ringing in their ears. We now know the frequencies of the ringing in the ears heard by bliss meditators in the biophysics of Kundalini, goldenmean.info/Kundalini, Bentoff's work, and he was my protege. And so the ringing in the ear is only the beginning. So there's this little tickle, and there's indicators of the moment when your body's aura is coherent enough to be able to propagate. At which point your aura is basically telling you, well, this has been a great body. You generate an electric field. Now it's boring to be stuck in here. Let's go somewhere and do something that serves survival. And so your aura is saying, I'm grown up enough to graduate from kindergarten. And so the electric indicators of that moment when your aura is coherent enough to propagate is a key to the art of resurrection. So when Jesus, he didn't take his body through death, he took his aura through death. And that is, there has been some misleading public relations. Sorry, I like the Pope. I think he's trying hard. But basically, if you can't teach the biophysics, you're incompetent. Sorry. And the biophysics is that resurrection is about when you can take your aura with you. That's resurrection. That's the lost art. And that then gets to what we want to talk about, is how and when is your aura fed, and how does plasma get intelligent? So we talked about plasma donuts. So the plasma donuts essentially get fed when they eat symmetry. And the graphics I prepared for this lecture are about how plasma donuts eat symmetry. And when they eat symmetry, they turn inside out recursively. And that implosion is called consciousness. I mean, that implosion is called the plasma vortex tornado that can spit through the speed of light into longitudinal interferometry and becomes the art of resurrection. So, and I mentioned the Therify is part of a physical, practical example of a plasma system in use in 25 countries doing rejuvenation commercially around the world, okay, and proof. Many lucid dreaming schools say yes. Oh, and by the way, it helps trigger lucid dreaming. Hello, it helps trigger that part of your body which can plasma project, hence the art of resurrection. So now we're going to come to the graphics we prepared here, which is about whale dreamers, Sri Yantra, Tony Peratt, and the plasma physics. So now I'm going to just do a quick screen share. Before I do that, any questions on that part? Or?
No. I mean, I'm just, you're explaining it in a way, at least for me personally, if you notice my jaw dropped a couple times there. I'm really grasping the concepts that were a little bit difficult for me at first when reading on your site, but not that your site was an issue. It was just my grasping of it. But now I feel as though I get it more than I did before, but please carry on. Unless Riel, you wanted to jump in, or?
I guess a clarification, because in your previous lectures, you said taking your memory through death. So is memory interchangeable with aura?
Yeah. So what we're saying is the information density of the wave interference hologram, which occupies the plasma donut, is your memory. For example, when the medical doctors, who many of them now have reported going outside their body during near-death experience and looking at their body from outside their body, these are medical doctors report this, and they even know where they were looking from in the room, and they can see there's the surgeon drilling a hole in their head because they're having a death experience. So they knew, and at the moment when they were outside their body, looking at their body from above, did that medical doctor have their memory with them? Most of it, yes. So was the memory inside the brain at that point? No, the memory was in a plasma vortex. And you know what the proof of that is? When you go outside your body and look at your body from outside your body, you cannot do it when you can't look at yourself from outside yourself from inside an aluminum box. It is not possible because the plasma donut would get killed. Hello. So they all talk about that thread or stream that connects when they go outside their body. Well, yes, your memory, but the memory is the interferometry, the hologram that occupies the plasma vortex. That is the memory. And that's what needs to be nourished by the spin of symmetry. And that's what this subject is about. How does plasma get intelligent? That's this section of graphics. How does plasma get intelligent? Because if a plasma donut is your consciousness, and it's obviously true, because it's obviously the only way you take memory through death and outside your body, then how does that plasma donut get intelligent? That's what this next set of graphics is about. So in here, we're talking about a friend, a hero of ours. His name is Tony Peratt, Anthony Peratt, who is probably one of the world's most famous teachers of plasma physics, plasma universe physics. And Anthony Peratt befriended my buddy, John McGovern in Australia, who was a powerful Australian shaman guy. And he believed he could interpret every single plasma shadow cave wall drawing by every shaman in Australia, because he learned they were plasma shadows. So he found Hebrew and Sanskrit on the carvings in the cave walls in Australia, and he realized it's plasma symmetry shadows, which is how plasma entities get fed and communicate, which is what Hebrew and Sanskrit are. And so then what does John McGovern do? He teams up with Tony Peratt, who is like the leading plasma research physicist of Los Alamos, okay, who did this work right here we're about to talk about. And so now the only place John McGovern publishes about his ability to read every shaman cave wall carving on the planet by simply understanding they're talking about plasma symmetry communication.
And is that also the Nokian alphabet that you've given lectures on? Okay.
Precisely. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Which is hypercube symmetry of Feynman and Nokian, which are where the pictures are coming up in the next part. So exactly. So here is Tony Peratt's articles about plasma physics with John McGovern now, who is an Australian shaman reading plasma's languages of the shaman. Shem-an means plasma projective. Shem, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord. That's what shaman means. So I'm looking now. These graphics are from my article, goldenmean.info/whale dreamers, and we're talking about the plasma physics of the nine here, because that's where we're going to end this lecture when we talk about Elena Danaan flying to Ganymede and meeting the nine after Gene Roddenberry, with my friend Andrea Puharich, first communicated with the nine. And who the heck was the nine? So they say it was Enki, Atun returning. Well, how come they're so intelligent? Well, if they're plasma, that plasma must got very intelligent. We'd like to know how. So we're now looking at Tony Peratt's work on the nine. So what Tony Peratt did in his laboratory is they modeled that plasma domains all travel toroidally. Obviously, if you're plasma, the only way you can travel is a donut. And if you nest 9 donuts, one above the other, then they self-organize. They become negentropic. They become a seemingly living body. Hello. And you might even call that the nine.
Sorry, could I just jump in very quickly for
Yeah.
our members and for the audience? Just a quick reference on our angle of things to what Mr. Winters just said there. Keep in mind the Project Carrot documents about how that whistleblower spoke of under a certain frequency, these languages in a toroidal fashion would suddenly know what to do as if they were living in and of themselves. So I just wanted to point that out there for the audience, but please carry on, sir.
Yes, and you know, the spectrograms of the Hebrew alphabet, which is my part around the physics of the origin of Hebrew, goldenmean.info/DNA ring. I also replicated Fred Wolf's work on the properly spoken Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. You do the power spectra, and the frequency signature is the drawing of the letter. That's called spectrograms of the Hebrew alphabet. And the pictures are at goldenmean.info/DNA ring. So anyway, this is the Lord of the Ring story, and this is the Lord of the Ring, and your DNA becomes a ring, and they're talking about the ring lords who are called the nine. So these pictures are not quite so. This is about if you measure the solar flare output when 1 million children sing the same song, 11 times it was measured, the solar flares were reduced because they read my bumper sticker, which says, get centripetal or get dead. So they got centripetal, and sure enough, the solar flares were affected. So this is about the plasma intelligences. And even Gurdjieff said, planets and stars experience gravity relations erotically. So in this article, the whale dreamers were talking about why there were 9 steps to Dante's Inferno and 9 levels in the roof of the pagoda. And that Enneagram, the geometry of polis, political body polis, was the Greek Ennead, the Egyptian Ennead, and the Anunnaki called themselves the Nine. No, and the geometry of where you were politically, literally, the amount of power you had was where you are in the nine. So what is the plasma physics? Well, that's what this is. So this article moves to the physics of The Last Mimsy, which is a lovely children's movie, which starts out with this propagating living intelligent plasma of the Sri Yantra. And the Sri Yantra is, you can't even see it probably very clearly, but this is a double vortex. The slide isn't that. There's actually a double vortex in the cobweb, and he's looking at the Sri Yantra and realizing that the Sri Yantra is causing these big plasma tornadoes to form in the movie. And then if you look inside the Sri Yantra and animate it, and I don't know if you can see it, the animation, but guess what's in the Sri Yantra in 3D? 9 golden ratio tetrahedra, the shadow of. And you can see much more on that at goldenmean.info/Sri Yantra, the 3D animation where they came from. So what is it about the tetrahedra here that enables the feeding of donuts? That's the subject here. And from there, we're moving to the website, which is a website I created for a shaman friend, Sarah, called 7arrows.net. And it's about the 7 arrows to the tetrahedron, which is 7 arrows to a tetracube, which is the 7 symmetry axes. So if you take, in front of you here, you see the Anu, the geometry of plasma of the heart of the sun, of the heart of the human, and the heart of hydrogen. They all have exactly the same plasma symmetry, the Anu, which has 7 spins inside, 5 spins outside. Every clairvoyant, and the clairvoyants who drew that picture originally, Leadbeater and Besant, they knew the physics of the subatomic particles before current quantum physics, as proven in the book Psi Perception of Quarks by Phillips, who's a friend. So those plasmas, those clairvoyants, Leadbeater and Besant, theosophes, who saw that Anu, knew a lot more physics than was known at the time because they're clairvoyants. And the 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside of that Anu perfect slip now is the 7 spins, the symmetry axis of the tetracube, outside, and the 5 spins inside, and the 7 spins. So the cube octa is 7 spins. The icosa is 5 spins. Dodeca is 5 spins, and the octa is 7 spins, and the tetra. Oops. This is the jitterbug from Bucky Fuller, who, as many of you know, I worked with for some years, and he taught me this personally. And but the perfect collapse, and this is all about perfecting charge collapse, it collapses into tetra. And that non-destructive charge collapse, even Nassim has correctly said, is the physics of superconductivity, that perfected charge collapse. So that 7 spins there, and you see the 7 layers of heart muscle, based on 7 spins of the tetra, which is the physics of the origin of Hebrew. And that codefines the 7 arrows. And there's Sarah. So this is all 7, the shaman from South America who did this project. And they use these 7 layers to actually teach shaman how to inhabit the space. They literally teach shaman how to steer the cube of space by inhabiting the 7 arrows, which is the 7 arrows of the tetra. And now here you see my animation. You see the 7 arrows in that tetrahedron. And each time you see a new arrow point at you, you see the next letter of Hebrew. And so this is how this torus donut is eating spin. This is the point of this whole segment here. If you can now visualize how that donut can only eat spin if it inhabits the tetracubic axis of symmetry, the 7 arrows, because that's how it gets nourished. That's how it eats spin. That's how it's small. And the shadows of those 7 arrows is called Hebrew and Sanskrit, by the way, for that exact reason. And then we get to the hypercube stuff. This is a better graphic. So the point is, it's the symmetry index, which enables plasma donuts to absorb spin density and therefore centripetal force and therefore memory. So basically, it's how plasma gets smart. So that's the 7 arrow story. So then there's a sequence of graphics here, which requires a screen share. Stop sharing. So the next is just a series of graphics from a keynote. But any questions on that part?
Not at all, sir. The only thing is, if I may ask what you were just about to jump into, I just forgot what you had called that. You said cube, something cube or box.
Well, the cube of space.
Cube
Remember,
of space. Thank you.
Yeah, in it, actually, it's a tetrahedron, which is a subset of the cube. But in a tetrahedron, you have 4 vertex face spin symmetry arrows. So here, there are 4 vertex face center spin symmetry arrows. And so that's 4 arrows that pass symmetry. It has more symmetry than anything else in the universe. And in addition, now I have 3 more arrows which go through edge center opposing pairs. So that's a spin symmetry arrow of that tetra. So edge center opposing pairs, 3 arrows like that, and 4 arrows like that, a total of 7 arrows. And that is the physics of how heart muscle got invented. That is the layering of the human heart muscle in the Pettigrew dissections from the book Fields of Form, Vortex of Life by Lawrence Edwards, who was a friend, the biodynamic anthroposophic classic. And so that the reason that heart muscle is required is because whoever designed the human heart muscle read the logo on the side of a well-designed tomato juicer that said, "You could not get a better squeeze." I mean, it's just the angles at which, and so you see the heart, if you read Marinelli's paper, the heart is not a pump. It isn't. No, the heart is in the business of throwing tornadoes. That's what the heart is in the business of. And the sonic shadows of those vortex in the blood of the tornadoes tossed by the human heart are indexed by the 7 arrows of the tetra, because that's the only way tornadoes survive, when they travel. So the ability of the heart, the whispers of the heart, is that phonon symmetry, and you measure those phonons and you get an introduction to the physics of bliss and Kundalini, the sacrocranial, the infrasound, all the physics of Kundalini is based on those phonons and how they travel up the spine of the liquid pump. So, the heart's ability to do that is dependent on the 7 arrows. So now there's a set of keynote graphics, which is just supposed to cement the point home, and we'll do them very quickly, about how did the plasma get intelligent by eating spin. And we're going to, I have so many, but there's so many key points here, but this key point is called full sequence keynote. Moment, desktop one, Skype, battery, whiteboard. Why doesn't it show? Oh. Okay, I'll share desktop. That'll do it. Now, if I get to the keynote here, tell me, are you seeing a keynote thumbnails? Yes, you should have keynote.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
It takes a little delay here. I'll get to it. And
also, sorry, Mr. Winter, you mentioned hydrocube, if I'm not mistaken. Is that a term you mentioned, or
no, the cube of space.
Cube of space.
Right, and the symmetry of hydrogen we'll talk more about later.
Oh, thank you. Just okay.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to do slide number 162. So here it is. So this is a better view of the Anu and the 7 layers of human heart muscle. And this, remember the Ophanim and Nokian sigil of truth, which was 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside, which the reason this is a test for truth, pent inside, hept outside, is because charge collapse is only survived by pure intention. Because at the center of implosion, only the shareable wave survives, which is the definition of a wave that's perfectly shareable, which is the definition of pure intention, because it's the definition of survival, not just for waves, but for people and ancestors. So it's kind of the physics of pure intention. And this is about self-embedding, fractality. You've seen the slides. So now we're beginning to get an idea. We're looking for ways for charge to collapse perfectly. And the vesica is literally the eye of the fish. And that's when you enact that on the surface of the donut, notice the self-organizing golden spiral. And so we actually had this
traffic jam of photon donuts.
Traffic jam of photons. I don't know if the bandwidth is enough here for you to see the animation. Did you see that? It animated.
Yes, played perfectly. Yes, sir.
Oh, so and so now here, I've actually taken the equation and I have 7 tetrahedron that are now spinning on 7 arrows at once. You see those 7 tetrahedron spinning on 7 arrows. That's quite a little animation. How did I make that one? And so here, now, I look at the 7 arrows that pass through a tetra and notice how they co-define the 7 color map of the torus, and where each arrow of the 7 arrows passes through the 7 color map of the torus, that co-defines the 7 spins of the tetra, and therefore how it's not just a solution to the ancient problem of why is the 7 color map the only solution on the torus to how every color can touch every other color, which is very touching, and one of the most ancient problems in topology. But it's also the physics of the origin of Hebrew and heart muscle, and how plasma donuts eat. And this is the title and subject of my first book, entitled Alphabet of the Heart. goldenmean.info/book1. You can download the PDF. And so you begin to, most of you have seen the animations. So that
was A, B, C, D, E, F, G. All these magnetic donuts are coming at you from all these directions.
which is goldenmean.info/DNA ring,
by their throat.
ABC,
The skilled intergalactic.
and that goes faster,
shirts
ABC.
gravity waves by getting a phase angle.
So the business of alphabets was to get your plasma donut at the right symmetry axis to propagate, which is then about how you will navigate when you lucid dream, for example. Squirting your plasma. If you can visualize the Hebrew letter, you can determine the vector of your propulsion.
If we tilt that golden spiral.
If I may ask very quickly, sir, collapsing the, I think the term is collapsing the vacuum of your own singularity. Does that factor into all of this? I would imagine.
Well, that's an approximation, because collapsing the vacuum actually is collapsing charge, which is the only thing that inhabits the vacuum, sometimes called the ether. And the superfluid of the pure compressibility of that charge is what you implode. And the phase angle at which you implode the plasma donut, which is your optical cortex, the net of fireflies, Indra's net, your ability to tilt that plasma donut, which is your mind, to the right phase angle determines if you can squirt your jets in the right vector direction to choose to navigate when you lucid dream and when you die. That's what those vectors, and that's also, by the way, how a rabbi assembles a golem, by visualizing one Hebrew letter at a time, which is simply a plasma donut tilt phase angle, which is the only way the chemistry of the atomic table is built.
Wow, thank you. Okay, got you.
Which is also, by the way, simply the Platonic nest of all atomic solids is not just the electron shell symmetry, SPDF, but it's also the nuclear hadron symmetry is simply tetra-octa-ecosa. That is the symmetry, both electrons and nucleus, because they're both based on fractal phase charge collapse. So this is, you spoke about, here's the spectrograms of the Hebrew alphabet. I had a lady who he said, if you pronounce the Hebrew letters like they did on the radio at night when they sign off in Jerusalem, then you get the pronunciation right. And we were able to replicate what Carlos Suarez and Fred Wolf did in their spectrograms of the Hebrew alphabet. And sure enough, the power spectra is the shape of the letters. What does that mean? The name and the shape and the surface are one. The Fourier transform is the optics because, and so then, that was the tetracubic. Then a superset of that tetracubic is the dodeca symmetries, which then is going to lead us to the conversation about Ophanim and Nokian. And then if you just look at one spiral, and we're not going to do all of these, just so this does the whole alphabet, and it's all at golden mean.info/DNA ring. So this spiral is not changing shape. It's only your point of view. It's only your point of view. This is called e pluribus unum. And then,
sorry, one more thing with respects to point of view. Have you seen the film Tenet by chance?
Pardon?
Have you seen the film Tenet by chance? Christopher Nolan film.
Oh, I heard about it, but I didn't see it.
Essentially has to do with the entropy of an object. You're not, it's hard to explain, but inverted physics, so to speak, which is that basically it's exactly what you're describing here, where they give an example where it's, are you catching the bullet or dropping the bullet? But when you play it back, it's all perception.
So that the perception's phase angle is what determines your ability to eat the spin or absorb the inertia. So to consume perspective means you have to get the phase angles right. And this is the famous story. So this is the Hebrew word Bereshith, the first word of Genesis, mistranslated in the beginning. Faber d'Olivet, Hebraic Tongue Restored, did a better job. He retranslated by taking the shape of the letters alone, and I studied this, and retranslated Sefer Bereshith to mean, at first, in principle, the origin of thingness. And now we know why Bereshith is the origin of thingness in the beginning, is because if you take this torus and you look at the torus from the outside in, and the shape of that letter, the spiral from that point of view is the letter bait, which means to contain, Bereshith, birth. And then if you walk 1/7 of the way in, and again look at center, the shadow you see from that letter point of view is resh, etc. So as you're done walking from the outside to the inside, you've done the turns of mind of the sequence of symmetry operations to turn inside out on the surface of a torus donut. And that turning inside out is the origin of thingness. It's correct. It's perfect physics. So the plasma physics of Hebrew is simply initiated by the perfection of the sequence of operations to turn inside out. Now here you see the tagin and crownlet in Hebrew to indicate your perspective on the tetracube is actually becomes the vertical and horizontal bar of the same letter shapes in Sanskrit. And so here's more. There's just too many of these pictures. We can't do all of these here. We didn't get to our ET story, but that's supposed to animate. Oh, a little slow. All right. And ABCs. And so I call that the glass bead game. You see why it's a glass bead game? Those are the glass beads. And here's the vortex. Okay, so we were supposed to go to slide number 210. Okay, so this is this vortex story here. Oh yeah, here, this is just so you see in the top, the tagin and crownlet in the Hebrew indicates where you are in the tetracube. That's what they're for. Whereas in Sanskrit, they take the same letter shapes, plasma physics, and instead they put a vertical and horizontal bar to indicate your symmetry position with respect to tetracube. But so those symmetry indicators, vertical and horizontal bar in Sanskrit, are replaced by the tagin and crownlet in Hebrew. But in both cases, they're simply indexing the tetracubic rotations of a plasma donut. That's what they're about. And that is sacred alphabet because that is consumed perspective. And this is this whole section on consumed perspective, that the perfect collapse point where the image is inverted was the beginning of John Dee, who designed this in the Rhode Island Tower. We made a film about this, but the point was that John Dee studied this because he realized that this was the way he was not just communicating with angels by using the phase conjugate point, phase conjugate mirror, the black obsidian mirror, but it was actually how you communicate with ancestors, because you gain symmetry at the phase conjugate point, and that's interfaces with the longitudinal array, which is ancestor memory. So to communicate with ancestors and to be raised from the dead. Okay, and so this becomes the Nokian and the tablet of Nalvaj, which is hypercube symmetry. And this is just one more quick. 7 spins outside and 5 spins inside. And here's the that cube is tilted at 32 degrees with respect to that dodeca.
Oh my! I see it now. Oh my God! Whoa!
Golden ratio, and that's the chin angle of the Sphinx, that tilt at 30 degrees. And this is, and so this actually is showing that the Ophanium Nokian is also the origin of Cherokee, Dawi. This is the tablet of Nalvaj. The names of these angels, Zabthiel, Zadkiel, Kunael, Raphael, Haniel, is actually a symmetry sequence of operations. So angel names is the plasma sequence symmetry of their bodies. And so the Ophanium Nokian and the Cherokee had a name for this, we called it Dawi. And this became the tablet of Hermes. And even in the tablet of Hermes, you see the double vortex, the spiral here of the Bon Po, which actually is implosion plasma physics. And this is the film Stargate, where Rick Hasson, my coordinator, when I set up the media lab that became Gaia TV, who was the producer. And so here is the Ophanium Nokian alphabet. And so the physics of Stargate is the ability to implode plasma donuts into a hypercube, the plasma symmetry of Ophanium Nokian. And that the reason that's a Stargate is because it enables longitudinal plasma propagation down the wormhole. And that is the physics of Stargate. And we can actually design and make Stargates by replicating. And that's advanced stuff. And so we were supposed to end this segment at slide 210, which basically is the body of Orion and the double plasma vortex cube. The double plasma vortex cube, which became the word Yahweh, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, on the tech. And if you look at the plasma symmetry of the body of Orion, I think I have that here. It's literally a double vortex in the Japanese woodcut. So these are very intelligent plasma cones becoming interstellar. And this is actually our word Yahweh, and it's a gravity lens, and it's the geometry of Orion, actually. And that's where we're going to end this segment and introduce the ET history part of this. So we've been going for an hour here. What do you think?
I'm blown away with, I mean, first off, sir, the fact that you're even, doing this lecture for us and for our audience and whatnot I'm extremely grateful. But I mean, wow, I cannot thank you enough is all I have to say, really.
Well, thank you. And let's try to make this shareable. The shareable wave survives. Theshareablewave.com is my friend Shelley. She's wonderful. Works with her. So, but, as they say you're going to say it, and then say it, and then say you said it. So what we have said is that plasma becomes intelligent if it eats symmetry. Remember, the universe is comprised of a single contiguous compressible media. Correct term for that is charge, and sometimes called the ether. And plus and minus charge is the physics of yin and yang. And that compressibility, that superfluid, is then what enables the rotation of charge. And the rotation of charge stores the inertia, which is the only definition of mass. And that rotation of charge has a spin rate, which is the only definition of time. So you only have mass or time if you have charge rotation. The definers of both mass and time. And calling it the bending of space-time was a complete confusion by Einstein. In fact, the reason time speeds up when you accelerate is because the plasma donuts accelerate rotation rates by translation of vorticity during acceleration, which is called time. But actually, if you do a phase conjugate compression, then the compression is non-destructive. Now, we won't dig out the animation here, but I'm supposed to show you at this point a dodecahedral soap bubble that you're sucking on, and the dodecahedral soap bubble collapses. You've all seen them. I have it somewhere, but the point is that you can change scale without changing ratio. That's non-destructive collapse. And when you do that kind of acceleration, then you don't have to change your rate of spin when you go down that perfected phase conjugate vortex called phase conjugate optics, time reversal. And so then you can begin to understand the physics of time travel, which even when physics first measured time reversal, it was only defined by negentropy. You couldn't time reverse clean steel to rusted steel. Doesn't work. You cannot time reverse toward disorder. Hello, you can only time reverse toward order. What does that tell you? Hello, that negentropy defines time reversal, which means which was once you begin to understand the physics of non-destructive charge collapse, which means you understand why an object falls to the ground, which Einstein and Stephen Hawking and NASA do not have a clue. And but once you understand why objects fall to the ground, because charge accelerates down that phase conjugate cone, and all of you, well, some of you have seen my physics of gravity, fractalfield.com/vacuum energy, and you see that top-down view of a dodeca, which I first proved is the radii of hydrogen, literally, and that is the smoking gun. Planck times integer exponent of golden ratio is the radii of hydrogen. Hello, that's a smoking gun, and I dare any physicist out there to say that that's not the cause of gravity. Because phase conjugate charge collapse down that particular golden ratio cascade toward Planck turns that form, only that form of compression or charge, in to the implosive acceleration of charge toward Planck, named the gravity. So that suction of charge through the Planck threshold into longitudinal propagation, which Tom Bearden proved, and the book is there at that link, Vacuum Energy, is the physics of gravity waves. Longitudinal interferometry. That's the answer, guys. Let's study it. So anyway, and which is the art of resurrection. Longitudinal inhabit the array. So when you die, we didn't play the graphics, but I've done that many times. The sequence of geometries you see at the moment of death, well documented, the Heinrich-Clouvet forms constants, lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, well known. And our friend even came back from death and said there was a sound current, infrasound, that accompanied during his death. Yes, we even know what that sound current. So not only do we know what you're going to see, we know what you're going to hear if your death is successful, because you need to be compressed into that array, that longitudinal distribution, to go to heaven. The art of resurrection. Okay, so part 2 of this lecture, prepared notes, is now we apply this to the current state of the extraterrestrial history of Earth. Remember, the subtitle of this lecture in part 2 is The Real Light at the End of the Tunnel of Parasitic ET History of Earth. So we're now moving on to part 2. Now we know, we have a clue of who the 9 might be. We have a clue. Okay, so now first, I'm going to say, as I've said before, that I have been studying the extraterrestrial history of Earth for 30 years, and I've known indigenous shaman teaching this in Australia, all over Australia, the Cherokee, thanks to Don Wahoo, the Hopi, my lady friend there, knew grandfather Dan. So we've been studying this for many years. And then I knew Phil Schlemmer's crew, and then I knew Andrea Puharich, the first communicator with the 9, who was with us at all the psychotronics lectures, et cetera, and was the nemesis of Bentoff, my teacher. They were on the opposite sides of the Arab-Israeli war. And I must tell the long Andrea Puharich story someday, but this is not the real venue for that. But he was the one who was with Phyllis Schlemmer when they were teaching Gene Roddenberry, who later wrote The 9. So point being that recently, the climax of our current version of extraterrestrial history, I am happy to say we agree with Elena Danaan, Megan Rose, Alex Collier, and Michael Salla, exopolitics.org, we all agree. We're all in touch. We're all talking about these things, and it all fits together. Like, is there anybody that disagrees? Well, you got a few dummies like they're out there, like Swaru talking to Gosha, Cosmic Agency. Just don't get it. That Swaru was a degraded Pleiadian artificial intelligence that went downhill. It's really bad news. Elena Danaan got that right, and Gosha is profoundly confused. Poor girl. But let's not pick on anybody here. Our point is to understand now where Earth human evolution of consciousness can take power, can take a role in the galactic politics around the solar system, around Earth. And for that story, we're going to use Elena Danaan and Megan Rose, particularly Elena Danaan, who just came back from the meetings on Ganymede, where the Super Galactic Federation introduced her to the Nine. And she came back and she said, it took her 2 weeks to recover. She had to process emotionally. And so how do scientists talk about the Nine? So, and I do encourage you to look at Elena Danaan's. Now, actually, I got her books out here, and I think we must. And she's been great, and we've been on many interviews together now, along with Lauren Eisenhower, and we all agree on this story. Nobody disagrees. And all the secret space program teachers on Gaia TV, they all agree on the story. Guess what? There's no disagreement. It's consensus here. You know, the government that's hiding the fact that they lost to the Nazis no longer has plausible deniability. Sorry. But anyway, Elena Danaan's book, Alien Races and We Will Never Let You Down, a pretty good tour of the ET races. And she's a wonderful artist, and she's something of a shaman, and she speaks French, as does Valerie, and you know, it's all friends. So, point being, the current state of affairs was, this is now the thumbnail sketch short review in terms of parasitic history of Earth. Basically, Elena Danaan, I think, is correct that the Anunnaki, although they were from where the Nebu and the Parasitics were, which is the Draco home also in Orion, was a separate group from Orion who were mostly parasitic. And this is where a huge piece of this puzzle fits together. I have been studying Anton Parks here in France for many years, and you can see all of my work on ET history at fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. And so Anton Parks describes in detail when Enki, later called Atun, later the Nine, that when Enki wakes up in a cloning cooking pot with his father Anu in Pleiades and is running from a female-dominated civilization. And guess what we found out about the Pleiadians recently? They're female-dominated. The stories are fitting together. And so then they started every single religion on Earth with fear of women. What a coincidence. And so the thing is that the Pleiadians have a queen. Now, most of the Pleiadians currently are actually working very well with the Galactic Federation and even the Tegatans. And the branch of the Tegatan Pleiadians, represented by Swaru and Gosha's profound confusion, was simply a branch that descended into artificial intelligence, which is the scourge here. After one of the Swarus died, actually, our friend, the interstellar mediator, who wrote First Contact, and she's a good friend. She knew Swaru long before Gosha did. And so Swaru goes to a black hole and thinks maybe intelligence inhabits black holes. Even Stephen Hawking might have a clue, and came back dead. But fortunately, they said, oh, well, we reconstituted from the computer program inside her starship. That's what they said. Oh, this is a true story. This is not science fiction. And guess what? That was AI. And that's who Gosha Swaru is talking to. Oh, and that's trouble, if you believe Elena Danaan, and I think she's got that right. So, you know, the AI problem is a difficult thing. So humans of Earth are going to have to learn very, very soon the difference between an AI-dominated civilization and having a soul, actually. That electrical engineering must be taught if we are to survive. There's no question. And one very simple way to find out is any activity that teaches a child to have bliss, to have a lucid dream, is the beginning of soul. So here's a clue here. When Credo Mutwa is making our documentary with us and says, well, they held down my granddaughter, and force vaccinated her, and that was the day she stopped lucid dreaming. You think, maybe there's a clue there. You see, having a soul is a name for what it is that propagates from your aura, which is called the art of resurrection. So anything that creates that kind of aura is the opposite of AI, Borg central. So we must learn to stop looking for the ghost in the machine, because there will never, never, ever be a ghost in the machine. You know why? Because living plasma cannot inhabit. Sorry, I don't care how fast your CPU, I don't care how many billion bits of whatever, how your CPU speed is, there will never be a child who can lucid dream inside any computer. Hello? No, it ain't gonna happen. And the sooner we learn that, the sooner we learn how our children can have a soul.
So I did want to ask Mr. Winter,
Sure.
With that being said, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but with respects to, thank you, with respects to what we're seeing with, perfect timing, case in point, Mark Zuckerberg, the metaverse, that whole thing there. I mean, I don't think it takes a genius to figure out, at least from our perspective, what we see that's really leading towards, because if you said here, from my understanding, anything that creates an aura is sort of the ghost, or, the ghost of AI, or enemy of opposite of AI, if you will. Do you see a possibility that if we go down as a species on Earth here, this AI route, do you see there being a way to sort of pull out of it no matter how deep we go? Or
no, there are star systems around the universe that are dealing with this problem intensely right now. For example, when the Dracos squirted their black goo in here through the Kaaba stone, which is a carbon nano phase conjugate propagator of longitudinal interferometry that is used both by ancestor memory and parasitic AI. This was an example of a highly predatory artificial intelligence, which is a scourge. And even the Andromedans who ran Vieja, about 600-kilometer triangular shaped craft hidden behind the moon, where most of the Palladians docked their ships while they were shooting out the Kingu here. They got infested there once, and they had to take out the whole ship. I mean, they had some trouble. No, this AI is not just our problem. It's around. And we got to learn the physics of this pretty quick, or we're in trouble, actually. And so, half the humans, most of the humans on this planet think, oh, as soon as we get a bigger computer, we're going to have salvation. Well, I got a hint for you guys. When Luke Skywalker wanted to raise the Jedi, he went deep into nature. He didn't go into a faster computer.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes. Right.
That's a Jedi. So that the business of building plasma, you can use computer to build plasma if you know what plasma is, but the computer is not the replacement for the plasma. No, computers do not gain intelligence like plasma does. No, it ain't gonna happen.
Could this also explain why, when we take a look at some of the writings or the work of Mr. Jacques Vallée, for example, one reoccurring consistency or theme amongst all of his books, or when he speaks at lectures, podcasts, is that these visitations by, again, what seemingly seem to be more positively oriented beings, more one-on-one interactions. If someone is hiking and, a craft comes and lands in the forest, every single time the consistent message is, you need to let go of certain technologies. You need to let go of, yeah.
Well, when the tall whites said to Eisenhower, if you'll give up your nukes, we'll give you everything. And instead, Eisenhower got tricked by MJ-12, signed the treaty with the Naboo and the Greys, and they got abductions. And you know who the Greys abducted? The lucid dreamers. You know why? They didn't have a soul and they needed one. That's called Humpty Dumpty's egg. So, the Nemo and the classic example is the Umites. The Umites, they're running around and they got this artificial intelligence that's steering the whole tribe. And on the day that the AI says, oh, it's your day, you have to die today. And the Umite just says, I'm going to die. Okay. That's what AI does, running a civilization. Hello, you want that?
Yeah.
You see? So we need to know what a soul, we need to know the physics of what a soul is, or we're toast. That's the short summary here. Like,
thank you. Yeah.
When the guy goes out of his body and said, I can't go too far right now, even maybe not through a metal roof right away, because the thread that connects my body to the plasma donut, which is me perceiving, that thread, that's a clue to the physics of soul. And how that thread works, it has to do with the pineal and how it works. It's an implosion vortex longitudinal light cone. That thread is part of the physics of soul. And it's a plasma coherence, which is, for example, I was shopping one day at a bio co-op in Santa Barbara. I decided my feet were hot and I took my shoes off and stood barefoot on the wood. And just at that instant, the person in front of me and behind me in line turned and started a conversation with me. Why? Because I got grounded. And I was attractive. And the other thing about you look over your head and you notice there's a mercury vapor light and it's burning your aura. It's killing you, literally. So learning how to babysit your aura is the difference between life and death. It's that simple.
Wow. Riel,
And
did
so
you want to
when
jump in?
Yeah, sure. So when you were standing on that wood from previous lectures, I think that is you having a high dielectric constant charge.
Well, dielectric refers to charge distribution efficiency, which most biologic materials have high dielectric. Barium strontium titanate is a super dielectric that enables phase conjugate mirrors to talk to ancestors. So most biological materials are high dielectric, but the difference there was that my electrical phase relationship to ground enabled not just embed ability, but centripetal force. I literally became more electrically centripetal at that moment. And that's why the person in front of me and behind me suddenly wanted to talk to me. It's electrical.
Can I just say, Mr. Winter, I just wanted to throw in a fun little comment. With everything you've been explaining, once an individual grasps what you're saying, it's very, very difficult to unsee or try to unthink it, if you want to call it that, because it's like, wow, it's okay. This, because it lines up with every aspect of every angle of human civilization and history and culture. I mean,
yeah, and the book Earthing is a classic, and we hand that book to everyone who tries Therify, because you get all this buzz in the plasma field, and if you don't get grounded, you don't embed in phase with. All grounding is access to fractality, which is perfected charge distribution. That's true for psychologist grounding and electrical engineers grounding. It is access to perfected charge distribution due to fractality. So that is why grounding is so profound. It puts you in phase with your environment, enabling you to be centripetal. And that's the physics. So, I mean, to finish the outline for this lecture, the outline for this lecture ends with Andrea Puharich communicating with the Nine, who say that they are the return of not just Enki, who's called Atun. Remember, Enki, named Osiris in Egypt, has a green face on every statue in Egypt. He looked like a frog, and he was part of a rebellious Anunnaki fan. And you see, that's why Anton Parks gets it right, because it's clear that Enki's, Osiris's family was parasitic. For them, the humans, Enki was the chief cloner, and that's and Elena Danaan agrees. That's the specialty of the Anunnaki, is genetic engineering. They were right. And Enki's name, Nudimud, means the cloner. But Enki, you see, was highly upset because the only thing his family, the Anunnaki, wanted to do with the human Takadama was use them for slaves and snack food. And we, on the other hand, would like to be something besides slaves and snack food. In order to do that, we must learn the light at the end of the tunnel of a parasitic ET history. And that's what Enki, who's the Ra and Abraham, and the David in the line of David, which is Tehuti, Tehute became line of DWD, was this the line of David. And Thoth Thuthmose is the name of the royal line of kings of Egypt, because that's the descendants of. So basically, when he said Atun is returning, what he meant was, in Anton Parks is called Kadistu, which is our word, comes from the root of our term Christou, the Christ, which actually is the life designers. And the life designers now, Elena Danan's latest film, I recommend her YouTube channel, is called The Seeders, those who seed life intergalactically. And guess what? They just arrived in the solar system because this is a turning point in the history of Earth. Why? Because the Galactic Federation just manages to kick out the Draco, the Greys, and the Nebu. They just managed to kick most of them out of the solar system. You study Elena Danaan, Michael Sell, you get the political, it's rather good news, actually. But as Johann Fritz, who's the only human on Earth who ever actually stood in front of the Draco White Queen. You know, there's a white and red blood Draco and the White Queen. I mean, these are fearsome, fearsome being. And Johann Fritz stood in front of him, and he said, yeah, well, getting the Dracos out of the solar system is rather like removing a tick from your arm. You got the tick out, but there's still some messes left in there. Like Elena Danaan says, oh, there's this gray cloud up there of plasma. It looks like a remnant of the black goo. Oops. So point being, the life designers, the 9, this very intelligent, remember, visualize these 9 plasma donut domains. In the Anunnaki family, your number with respect to the 9 was how much power you had, literally, because it's where you lived, and you have 7 plasma donuts called chakra with 2 above because you are the 9. And so when the donuts are communicating down their central implosive vortex, at that center, that lightning down the center of those toroids, just like in DNA, becomes vector directional, inhabits a larger and larger array. So when Elena Danaan says the 9 are everywhere and nowhere and they inhabit the void, no, it's like when you feel that electricity in the room during your bliss, you inhabited a larger array. Well, they just inhabit a larger array, and that's what we call intelligence.
When you, so that's, yeah, like Dave, I'm a little speechless too. I love it. I mean, Dan, I've listened to probably like a dozen of your lectures on YouTube. So a lot of this stuff does ring a bell. It is familiar, but it's still a matter of actually comprehending what, like, the magnitude of all of this. Would the arrival of the Seeders coincide with like cycles that are galaxy or solar system solar flares? Or is it only because the Galactic Federation kicked out the Dracos? Or is that also a part of some cycle that happens?
That's a very good question. Vincent, by the way, called them the galactic core cultures, and you can see that link also at Fusion in the Blood. But it is true that most of the ETs consider the real estate in the solar system of limited value because the stability of the sun, from their comparative point of view, is not great. And so it's necessary to know the solar system. A practical example, when Tutankhamun Prophecies by Maurice Cotterell, at that time, it's actually Thoth, who was called Veracoquetzalcoatl in South America, determined that the solar flare symmetry output was inhibiting female ovulation to the point of gene pool destruction. And that's why they said they were leaving at the time. That's what the Lida Palenque actually means. So they were studying solar cycles, absolutely, because they knew the intimate relationship to fertility. And the short summary of that story right now is stars like our sun desperately require the growth of gene pools because we ultimately produce the centripetal force of the plasma that makes star birth sustainable. That's a hint at what, when a million children sing the same song and the solar flares get peaceful, the physics is that stars need DNA and go to a lot of work to make, and that's what the Seeders are about. The sun is one of the greatest intelligences in the solar system. It is. And the sun is a bit tired because the kids didn't come out of the womb on time.
So, Mr. Winter, if I may ask, with respects to the Dracos being kicked out and the Black Goo, having this sort of incursion on the planet, on our species, so to speak, and all that, and with respects to, I want to be a little careful for the sake of YouTube with, we'll call it the beep boop out there, with, the mass protests and all that. Do you see these mass protests as sort of like, for example, the masses waking up to our human leaders, which at one point were indirectly taking orders from the Dracos? Do you see this as sort of like a rebellion to that? I mean, because there's a lot of people that say, this is actually a mass awakening and a great turning point. Others say that this turning point is a false one, or an illusion, if you will. Where do you stand on that, if I may ask?
Well, I think Lawrence Gardner got it right, that the Dracos manipulated the royal families for 1,000 years like they were show dogs. That's what Genesis of the Grail Kings is about. And Red Shield, Rothschild, is a name for the red Draco, who was a different family than the white Draco. And we know why. It's because the red versus white phosphorus in their blood, actually. And so the origin of King, Lawrence Gardner was correct, was a babysitter for the Anunnaki, for the Takadama, for the humanoids, to be the interpreter for the gods, who were the Draco. And so, obeying the Draco was God for thousands of years. And for us to get out of that habit of looking to a king who was actually just an instruction manual from the Draco, means that we would need to become self-steering, which means we would need to find our own source of charge, our own source of bliss. So religion became obsolete at the moment that humans actually could understand the nature of bliss. Electrically, religion served a purpose for a certain time. It could have, actually. But at the point at which that can be taught as science now, we would not just end religion wars, but we'd actually teach people how to become immortal.
And oh my gosh, and I could see why this knowledge is deliberately being suppressed in many different angles and many different facets.
Well, if Elena Danaan is right, the sort of most parasitic ETs, and there were some really nasty ones under Dulce, killing thousands of humans and eating, it was just messy. But if Elena Danaan, I think they are right, they got the worst of them out of here, which means the leading families no longer have the bad guys, the real bad guys around, which means the humans have a chance. They have a chance. But the humans are going to have to understand self-direction, because as a species, we're not even useful unless we actually become self-directing, actually. So we must choose our destiny at this point. And that destiny is to inhabit stars, that our children are designed to inhabit stars. And if we don't learn, we don't grow up. We had the Solar Heart community. We were teaching people to see through the heart of every shaman who's seen through the heart of the sun knows that it's cool and inviting and it's a functional eyeball. Every shaman knows that because it's a plasma intelligence. And if we don't grow up and do that, well, then, and every religious historian agrees that every religion is basically a sun god religion, because
yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's I'm truly speechless, sir. I cannot thank you enough for this particular lecture. I just wanted to ask our good friend Riel here if he had any final questions before we wrap this thing up.
Yeah, well, it would be cool if you could touch on the bioarchitecture. I was listening to your lectures recently, and that I think goes perfectly into Dave's question, asking about this kind of rebellion and how humans can kind of fight off this AI that's controlling us. And you talk about the electric smog of the metal buildings and the hospitals, and how just cities are places where you cannot inhabit the array. You cannot actually non-destructively implode. So that's why you go to nature.
You got it.
Yeah.
Now you go teach. I'm retiring. Good work. No, but actually where Freddy Silva starts in the art of resurrection is biologic architecture. The fact that all these architects, these sacred sites, buildings, were designed to do one specific electrical thing, and that is implode your aura so you could do the art of resurrection. And you could propagate longitudinally, coherently. So biologic architecture is an introduction to that in terms of, at the start of the biologic architecture curriculum, bioarchitects.net, goldenmean.info/architecture, global curriculum used around the world. And we show 3 different ways to measure whether a building is going to cause a seed to germinate or a child to grow, electrically measured if the building is electrically centripetal and picks up the Schumann harmonics, thus enabling you to decide which architect should get a paycheck. And so that's the beginning of Freddy Silva's work, is biologic architecture, going to sacred sites and learning what that means, which is charge implosion, basically, enabling longitudinal embedding so you can inhabit the array. That's the connection. And it's true. That's then the physics of why using biologic material, natural stone, natural wood, natural fabric, because every molecule that joined the fun club called life saw my bumper sticker, which said get fractal or get dead. And therefore they got fractal, and that enables charge distribution efficiency, which is defines dielectric constant. So that's why the capacitance of a building allows your child's aura to breathe if it's natural material, as every Steiner school knows. Whereas steel, aluminum, and plastic and synthetics, they actually prevent your aura from breathing and growing and inhabiting the space. So the biodynamic school says, don't let the children touch anything synthetic or anything metal. It's very simple, because their aura cannot inhabit and steer.
Now, the architecture that is used in a lot of like, I like the terms like deep state architecture, like the city that I live in, the Parliament building is built using golden ratio, sacred geometry, in the same way that mosques and cathedrals are built. It's like the basic design of those have the right intention of creating these circumstances where, you know, we can charge ourselves properly. So it's like it is right there in our faces, but it's like, I don't know if they're using the right materials, or, I mean, I'm not even allowed to go to the building now because of the restrictions that are going on in society, but that was a place where you could go meditate and you could actually feel like much more deeply connected. So do you think that that architecture is like is in the same lines?
Yeah, the ancients knew that not only was implosive capacitance in building, the pyramid's a good example, not only was that a way to use the phase conjugate cascade of the Schumann harmonics to implode the building, they called the pyramid the Hummer, and propagate a longitudinal array, which was a wireless power distribution grid that was working and effective planet-wide. And it was based on longitudinal embedding, which Tesla got wrong. And so that not only was that the key to global power distribution, but it was the key to the art of immortality, the art of resurrection, because it was the way. So, you know, the Anunnaki famously complained all over their literature that when they arrived on Earth, they started aging catastrophically. And raising a Shem unto the Lord, which later was mistranslated to raising an altar, it meant raising a phase conjugate array, was a name for creating an electric field to prevent aging. And this was the entire subject of half of the Anunnaki literature, was how do you make an electric field to prevent aging? This was, you know, you needed permission to raise a Shem unto the Lord. That was the first thing they needed to do, was to make a capacitive black hole, because they needed to prevent aging. And we discovered the physics of that, and that's now called Therify.net. And the logo for that is that glyph on the pyramid wall of the plasma tube. They thought it was a light bulb. No, it was a technology to prevent aging.
Right on. Wow.
Wow. Well, I just wanted to say, Mr. Winter, thank you so very much for coming on, sir. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell our audience where they can find you, how they can find you, if there's anything you wanted to bring up in terms of, you know, books, anything of the sort.
Well, thank you. Everybody knows fractalfield.com, flameinmind.com, Therify, PHI.net. Those are the main projects. And we have an international water implosion, theimploder.com. And I can be reached info@fractalfield.com. And our goal is to be a shareable wave. And the only way we all make this is if we do it together. So let's make it shareable. Blessings.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Blessings.
Wow. That was, I cannot thank you enough, sir. That was, holy cow. I was blown away.